And hello, welcome back. Today I want to talk about what is the difference between support and resistance and supply and demand. Those things are often confused. They are similar, but there are certain differences, obviously. The slides are part of our supply and demand trading course. So if you are interested in learning how to trade supply and demand, and you find this kind of interesting, make sure to check the link in the description below. So let's start with what is support and resistance. A very basic definition is that support and resistance are levels where the price has previously shown a reversal action at. So what does that mean? Here, for example, we have a support area where the market always bounced up, and then this was used going forward as a resistance as well. So whenever you see that the market is turning around at a certain area, we call that a support and resistance. So here, for example, the market came always back into the level from below and then turned lower, rallied into it and then turned lower. So this is an established resistance. At one point, this will break and then the market comes back to it and it is respected as a support area. So this is how support and resistance generally work. And usually the support and resistance areas, they stand out on your charts quite nicely. But there are certain differences when we talk about supply and demand. What is very, very interesting once we get into the details is that support and resistance are generally used in classic chart analysis, but supply and demand actually precedes support and resistance. This means that supply and demand usually comes first, and then once we have a supply and demand area, then afterwards support and resistance areas are created. So a trader who knows about supply and demand can actually be one step ahead of the general crowd, because she will know when and where it's likely to see a supply and demand area to be created. For example, here this is a general spike supply and demand, and there are many different ways of spotting supply and demand. There's not just the general theory, which you have seen probably around many YouTube videos or on trading blogs, but there are actually many different kinds and types of supply and demand. So in this case, we have a spike supply and demand. I call it drop and reverse. The market has clearly shown a reaction here. So whatever happened here, we can be sure that here is a very strong demand area. Then the market comes back into it the next time, very precise reaction. We overshot this area a little bit, which is typical. It's very typical. This is a supply-demand spike pattern, which you learn in the course as well, but it doesn't matter in this context. What you can see is that when the market comes back into this area, we see another reaction at the level, and we see another reaction at the next time. Each time we pick up more buying interest and we move higher, pick up buying momentum and we move higher. So those areas can be used for trade entries, and looking for trade patterns can be very profitable at those areas. And you can see how this first demand area creates then a support area going forward, even here. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that's worth paying attention to. Here as well, on the left hand side, there are two demand areas on top of each other. There are certain characteristics that you need to look for in a supply and demand area to make sure it's actually a strong supply and demand area. Without getting into the details, those characteristics are given here. So we have two demand areas on top of each other. I called it demand stacking, which is a very important characteristic. And you can see the next time the price comes into this level, we first touch the first one, the higher one, then we see another rally, we come back. Actually this time, because now it's more obvious, we penetrate the first area and we reach into the second area. Very important demand spike here, and we see a strong reaction, and then the market comes back to it. At this point, everybody will know about what has happened here and what has happened here. So even the trader who has missed the first and the second point will now know, okay, this is a support area, right? And what happens if everyone knows, it usually doesn't work as well anymore. So you see that the market does spend a little time here ranging, but eventually we break through that and the market comes back to it, treats it as a resistance, we come back to it, break above it, treat it as support 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. So you can see how a single, or in this case 2 demand areas on top of each other led to the creation of a long-term support and resistance zone. And yeah, if you know how to spot supply and demand, this can be very, very helpful if you are also looking for support resistance trades and if you want to look for how to get into trades. Here, another example. Oh, let me actually move this so it's in the frame. That would help. So here you can see we have a demand spike. Here we have a demand drop and reversal. So we have two demand areas which fulfill all the criteria that we need. And you can see going forward, both areas are then the cause for support resistance areas. Here we came a little bit short, which is also something that happens because when there's a strong demand area, not always will you get a complete move back into the origin, but there are usually open interest gravitating and moving, spreading around this area. So you can see we have a premature reaction here, and then the next time we come back even below the origin, and you can see the super strong reaction. So a clear, valid demand area. Here as well, super important, very interesting spike. Here it is the origin of this huge trend move. We have all the characteristics that we need, and you can see the market drops into it, and we see more and more reactions, a lot of accumulation happening around this area. So again, a single demand is then the cause and the origin of a important support area going forward. And that is how you can see that often supply and demand and support resistance, they can fall into the same place. This is usually the case because supply and demand precedes support resistance, and supply and demand is the cause actually for support resistance levels very often, not always, but very, very often. And that is the difference between support resistance and supply and demand. So supply and demand are usually the origins of very extreme strong price moves where often institutional buying and selling has been going on, and you can spot those areas very effectively on your charts because, well, the big players, they cannot just open one trade on their MetaTrader platform. They usually have big positions that they need to build over time, and then once they have accumulated all the liquidity, then, well, there's no one on the other side of their trade anymore, and the market has to rise, which usually happens in a good supply and demand zone very, very quickly, very aggressively. And that is then how you can spot supply and demand, support and resistance, supply and demand on your charts and use it going forward. For trade timing, for take profit placement, there are certain patterns that you can look for around the supply and demand area to get into a trade. But this is a little bit beyond this video. In this video, I just want to show you what is the difference and how does a supply and demand area cause and create support and resistance going forward.